Hello and welcome to the Freedom Experiment with myself, David Smith. This week I have a lovely lady from Vermont in the States. Her name is Christa Gowen. She is a TRE, TRE
Provider.
TRE
Yes.
provider and a yoga instructor. So I think I better just let you take over what TRE is and introduce it to the audience and myself. What is TRE?
Sure. So I was actually going to ask if you knew what it was because there's a big following in Australia. So I was curious if you had heard of it before. So TRE is an acronym, and it stands for Tension and Trauma Releasing Exercises. And it's a series of physical exercises that we do to help induce a natural shaking mechanism in the body. And the shaking is actually a built-in part of your nervous system's ability to complete a stress response, right? So we've all sort of heard of fight or flight and also a freeze. And what happens is when those things can't happen or don't happen in the body, your body still has those survival hormones that have started coursing through it that need to be discharged and sort of dealt with in a way. And shaking is one of those ways that your body can do that. And so what this is doing is intentionally activating that in your body to help sort of complete that and allow that discharge to happen from things in life that get stuck and sort of held on to in our physical, emotional bodies. We can start to gently tease some of that out and allow it to be released when we do practices like TRE.
Oh, perfect. I actually, now that you explain it like that, I have done a bit of TRE. I just don't think
Okay.
I've had it explained like that. I had a guy here doing, he started a thing called shaking medicine, here
Mm-hmm.
where I live, and it's exactly what you're talking about. And I've done it a few times in some yoga classes, and I do find it's quite interesting how the body, just naturally vibrates and shakes when you put it in the positions, like involuntarily.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So have you done it yourself? Like, is it what led you to do that or to want to teach that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think like a lot of people that end up teaching this, I came to it out of necessity, right? So I was at the point in my life where I really needed relief. I was suffering from really chronic anxiety and crippling panic attacks that were happening at their worst almost every single day. And I had sort of done all the things that you're supposed to do to help with both of those, right? I had kind of tried all of the stuff, and I had done a lot of what we call top-down approaches, right? So that's where you're working with the brain to affect change in the body, you're sort of working, top-down. And what I was finding is they weren't working very well. Anything that gave me relief, the relief was short-lived, and I was still, suffering a lot. And I got to this place, I actually remember saying to my husband at the time, I was like, I had been in therapy and had been doing therapy for a while. And I was like, I don't feel like I have anything left to talk about. I don't feel like the problem's in my head, but I'm still having these symptoms and still experiencing these panic attacks. And so it kind of hit me. I had this aha moment where I went, okay, well, if it's not in your brain, Christa, where is it? It's in your body, right? And I think for anyone that's experienced a panic attack, it's like when you look back on it in that way, it's like, well, no kidding, because a panic attack is a very physical experience, right? It's this physical manifestation of this mental feel of panic, right? And anxiety, like just crushing your body. And so it makes sense when I think about it now that the solution to that also needs to involve the body. And so I kind of got to this place where I had had the worst panic attack I had ever had. And I felt so betrayed by my body. I felt ashamed of how I, kept having these attacks. And I kind of got to this place of just surrender. And I sort of turned it over to the universe and said, all right, I have been doing my damnedest and I need help. Like, show me something that's going to finally take care of this. It's not for lack of trying on my part, but I need help. And it was sort of one of those like divine intervention things where TRE came across my path within the month. And I found a therapist who also was a provider, and we did TRE together. And the first time I did it, it was like every light bulb went off that that's what was missing, is that every panic attack I had ever experienced, starting when I was 12 years old, was my body trying to discharge this energy, and I didn't understand that, and I was afraid of that, and I interrupted that process, and it was really just this shaking, my body trying to do what it knew innately to do, which was discharge the stress from my system, and I was interrupting it. And that sort of interruption and my thinking brain overriding that beautiful wisdom of my body created this inner conflict that was a panic attack.
Wow.
And so it obviously changed my life. I haven't had a panic attack since starting my practice. It's been over 5 years now. And it was the kind of thing where I instantly knew, I was like, all right, this is the thing. It's changed my life, and I need to help other people do this as well, right? When you suffer for so long and you finally find something that works, it really inspires you to want to help others and to say, I found, this is the thing, this can, and obviously it doesn't help everyone is different, and it's not a cure all for everyone. But the point is, so many people I talk to are like, that sounds amazing, I've never heard of it. I sort of joke that TRE needs better PR people, which is part of the reason that I have been so delighted to do podcasts lately, just getting the word out, because it's absolutely transformational.
Wow, I can really hear the truth and resonance coming through your voice. And can I just clarify? So a panic attack, from that understanding, is the body releasing trauma, but we've labeled it as like a panic attack, but it's actually the body releasing trauma. But because we're stuck in the thinking mind, we are just looking at it as a negative, and well, we're kind of like lost in it. But actually that's what animals do, right? In the animal kingdom and stuff, like they go and they hunt something, and you see like a cheetah will shake afterwards. Am I right in thinking that? Is that what you're alluding towards?
I'm alluding to that. That's exactly what my experience was. I can't speak for everyone that that's what their panic attacks are, but I know for me, that's exactly what it was. Like I knew with absolute certainty and clarity, because you are right that animals do this, right? So all mammals have this innate capacity of their nervous system to shake. And a lot of us have actually seen this. For those of us who have dogs, when they hear loud noises or there's thunder or fireworks, it often sends them into trembling or shaking, right? And that's the same thing that we humans are capable of. Many of us have actually experienced it in our own lives without necessarily knowing what was happening. So this isn't true for me. I am not afraid of public speaking, but for those of you that might be afraid of public speaking, that sort of trembling that you can get in your hands, where you think, and we often associate it as being scared. It's not so much, it can be that you're scared and that it feels dangerous to you, but the shaking itself is really your body just discharging those hormones of fear, right? It's the same if you hear sirens and you get pulled over, or, something happens and then you shake afterwards. And the problem is that we become conditioned socially to think that shaking is a sign of weakness, right? And we don't like weakness. And so we sort of stop that, and we learn to override that at a young age. You'll actually watch young children and notice that they'll shake after something happens, and then they kind of go about their day and they're fine. And what adults tend to do, and what we learn to do, is to interrupt that. And when we do, those survival hormones, those stress hormones, are still in our systems, coursing through our bodies. And it's fine if it happens occasionally, but the world that we live in, stress isn't occasional, right? Take 2020 and everything that's happening this year out of it, and life is still stressful. It isn't, the world we live in isn't what our ancestors evolved to live in. We go from stressful thing to stressful thing to stressful thing. And it's often things like, overflowing email inboxes, or 24/7 news cycles, or traffic jam, right? Those things to our survival brain are seen as danger. And so we're chronically activated, and then we don't take time and we don't value rest and allowing space for deactivation in our nervous system. And so these things start to pile up and accumulate in our body. And chronic nervous system activation has been shown to be linked to chronic the word just left my head,
It's
immune
okay.
system
Oh, wow.
activation, right? And so chronic immune system activation is associated with chronic inflammation. And we know now that chronic inflammation is associated with lots of chronic diseases, things like Alzheimer's and heart disease, right? And so you can
Cancer or?
see how, I don't know if I don't know if cancer overall is inflammatory. I'm sure that certain cancers probably are.
Mhm.
But you can see how it's, over time, these things can start to accumulate to really do some serious damage in your body, let alone what it's doing to your mental self, right? Those are all just physical conditions, but then it starts to erode your mental health as well. And so when we can start to undo some of that and release it, our lives get better, they get easier, the panic attacks leave, right? Life becomes vibrant and full again instead of feeling overwhelming and scary all the time.
Wow, so beautiful. So how do we get to that state? What's some simple things that we can start doing in our life to get on the way there, or do we need to straight away do TRE or?
Well, yes, you should definitely straight away do TRE. But in general, it's about allowing yourself space to really to decompress from things and understand that, you know, just living in modern society is stressful. And I think that awareness and that acknowledgement can go a long way. We are so, I think one of the hopefully silver linings of this entire pandemic experience is that it slowed a lot of people down and made people realize that their schedules and their calendars were really busy before. And I noticed this for myself that, I went from having a very busy life to then having nothing on the calendar. And now in the last several weeks, it's started to slowly kind of pick back up. And I've been able to sort of notice that difference in my own system of now I
Mm.
have to sort of look, before it was like, I don't know what day it is, but it doesn't matter. And now I have to kind of look at the calendar again. And just that alone it starts to sort of tighten that feeling of stress. So taking time to really allow ourselves space between things is a huge first step, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so while we're talking on trauma, I noticed that you said something on your website about rewriting your family trauma lines. That's something I'm super interested in because we're talking about trauma that probably we've faced. I don't know if I better just let you go because I'll go off into some tangent, but I'll let you just explain that.
Yeah, so this has really been near and dear to my heart since becoming a mother 2 years ago. And really, even before that, I sort of made the conscious decision to wait to have children because I knew that there were some things that, um, from my own childhood that I didn't want to repeat and I didn't want to become my parents, right? I think that's a pretty common narrative. And so I really kind of consciously took time to do some of the work to dismantle some of the stuff that they had handed me, essentially. And I think that this is, I just think it's so important because I think that trauma is incredibly systemic through our society. And I think that it's finally now, I think, starting to get a little bit more attention and press that this stuff can be inherited and passed down. And we know that on sort of a more like psychological and mental level, and on a spiritual level, it can be passed down. But we also know that it can be passed down on an epigenetic level. It can actually change the way that certain genes are expressed in our bodies, right? And it can make us more prone to diseases. It can change the way that our brain develops. And so when we can become consciously aware of that and do the work that it takes to interrupt those cycles, we offer this beautiful gift to the world, right? I say, the clients I work with most often now are who I call radical mothers, right? And we're the ones that sort of say, I'm done. Like this stops here with me, and I will do the work that it takes to transform these stories and this inheritance of trauma. Because here's the thing, if you want to give your kids a better life, you really have to start with yourself. And you really have to start by changing your life and doing the trauma healing work for yourself and doing the interpersonal development work for yourself so that you can then model that for your children, right? You can't give abundance from a place of lack. You have to be able to show them how they can do this for themselves by doing it first for you. And that's really hard, and it's lonely, isolating work, which is why I try to reach out to those people and work with them, because I don't think that it has to be that way. But it's so important that we can, be that transitional character when trauma is a part of our past. I sort of think about it as that radical mothers are like the fire break in their family line, that trauma is this wildfire that runs through it until someone finally sort of stands up and says, no, at all costs, it stops here with me, and I will draw the line in the sand that stops that fire from spreading.
Wow, that is so inspirational. Like, for all the mothers out there, I've got I'm not a mother obviously, but my friends, I've got a lot of friends. I'm kind of at that age group. I don't have any kids myself, but a lot of friends that are moving into that next stage of their life. So, thank you for sharing that wisdom. I think it's so beneficial and would probably help a lot of people.
And it's important work for, I know you said you don't have kids yet, but if you're planning on having kids, it is important work for fathers too. It's just, obviously, as a mother myself, that's sort of my group. But yeah, I think it's important in general for parents to really be aware of these things that we're choosing to model and demonstrate and pass on or not.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes from inquiring into your own journey. Like, I know myself that I've picked up patterns from my mother and my father, and I'm not. I feel fine about it. It's okay, but it's important to see, I think, to make like my life better in my reality, and then whatever generation you're going to pass that down to, isn't it? So I think it's just amazing to hear that you're these radical mothers, like, you're breaking the chain, and that internal work, like that is the work that's going to change the world. Like that is changing the world. Like that work that you're doing, that work that this radical mothers group is doing, I straight away get filled with inspiration and my heart opens, because it's so powerful. Like, I understand how powerful that is, and it's just happening in the background with all this systemic stuff crashing down, all this stuff happening in 2020. I just understand that underneath all that, there's so many people wanting to teach yoga more, so many people meditating, so many people, now know about these radical mothers group that are doing all this work with their children. It's just like, it's inspiring. There's this huge shift of consciousness that's rising, and it's amazing to be a part of, amazing to see.
I agree. And it's an exciting time. It's a challenging time to be alive right now, but I think that it's also really exciting. And I think that there's so much potential for things to really start shifting, for some of these narratives to, like narratives on a larger level, some of the cultural paradigms that we've been dealing with, expectations of mothers, unconscious agreements with mothers. I am excited that this stuff can change, because it needs to, right? Like, I think that we're kind of at a critical breaking point where things need to change, and so I'm excited to be doing that for myself, and then also helping to facilitate that with the mamas that I work with.
So good. And I see you doing dynamic self-care. Is that a part of this radical mothers group, or is that what you're offering? Or
Yeah, so I kind of came up with this term. I was trying to think about how to, self-care is one of those terms that we hear. It's kind of thrown around a lot these days, which is good, but in a way it's also bad, because it's sort of diluted what it meant originally and sort of what I think it should mean. And so I've started calling what I talk about and what I teach dynamic self-care, to differentiate it from sort of quote unquote Pinterest style self-care, right? What you see is like pretty pictures of like bubble baths and, bottles of wine and dark chocolate, all things that are wonderful and lovely, but they're not really caring for yourself on this deeper level, right? Which for me is what self-care should be. So for me, it's made up of these three pillars, which are self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-love. And I see those three as being interconnected and interdependent upon one another. And they're really a framework to begin to start to look at things like patterns of trauma in your life, to look at, maybe trauma responses that you are perpetuating, to become aware of how you're interacting with yourself, right? What are the subconscious thoughts that you're perpetuating? I kind of had this realization and light bulb moment, that tends to be the way things happen for me in my life, around some internalized subconscious self-hatred, that I had this realization. I had what I describe as an awakening to love, where I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition, and I had been struggling with that for a while. And this was sort of before I had found TRE. And again, I had kind of done all the things that you're supposed to do to make that, be better. I had cut out gluten and I had changed my life and all these things. And I was still having a lot of symptoms. And it took me sort of thinking about, like, what does it mean to have an autoimmune condition? Why is my body attacking itself? Why would it get the message that I'm the enemy, right? Its job is to attack foreign things. So why would it think that I'm the foreign object here? And it hit me that it's because I was telling it that. I was delivering these subconscious messages of self-hatred, and then my body was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, which was attack the enemy. And so this kind of, really fueled the work that I do, right? This idea that self-awareness and self-love, and then when you start to understand the wisdom of your body, having compassion for yourself for the ways that you behave, are all so interconnected. And that's really what self-care is about. That's what dynamic self-care is. It's taking care of yourself to say, I have needs that need to be met. I have, who am I as a mother outside of being a mother, right? That's what it means to care for yourself, so that you can then show up and be a good mother, be a good partner, be a good spouse, be a coworker, a friend, a daughter, right? Be a good person for yourself, is by cultivating this relationship and taking the time to really care on this deeper level.
Wow. Yeah, I can really, I'm taking a lot out of this just personally as well. The inner critic within me that is always, I've done a lot of work I've gone to more of a place of detachment from thoughts and detachment from that inner critic, or we could say the egoic mind that's constantly trying to like drag me down, like that element of control that's trying to just bring me back into form or into shape. The work I do is I just try to release myself from that identity, and yeah, so it sounds like you're doing it from like a slightly different angle, but what you're doing is you're changing the subconscious patterns of the mind, and it just shows the power of the mind, doesn't it? Like I think that's the incredible thing. Once you start meditating, doing yoga, doing your self-care work, or whatever you're doing, you realize how much power the mind has over the body. Essentially, that's been my biggest revelation, is that my thoughts, I have to understand like where I'm directing the energy, I suppose. So I think I'm getting a lot from your dynamic self-care and how that's building up the more compassion and more self-care within.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience too, right? Is that the power of my thoughts have created illness in my body, and they've also created wellness. And then ultimately, when I can sort of remove myself and from the situation and let my body do what it needs to, and allow my body to sort of run the show, it's more powerful than anything else. It has this incredible wisdom for doing exactly what it needs to do. And it never ceases to amaze me, and just, I'm in awe of it. Right. And this is the other thing about this too, is that, I am often talking about how nervous system literacy is the gateway to dynamic self-care. And that when we start to understand the ways that our body is wired to work and has these certain innate capacities and certain innate, patterns and resources that it can draw on, we can start to shift that internal narrative from something of shame and embarrassment and and just negative self-talk to one of compassion and love. We can start to understand that our body is not betraying us, that it's actually serving us. And when we can start to understand those patterns and start to see them, we can shift the patterns for ourselves so that life, it softens and makes things easier, right? Living from a place of love and compassion. I've done both. I've lived from a place of hatred and shame, and I've lived from a place of love and compassion. And I can tell you the latter is a hell of a lot easier. It's not always easier to get there, but when you do, it just, it's better, right?
Oh, I hear you. How do you transmute shame to compassion and love? Like shame and blame into compassion and love. Like I think nearly every human on this planet would have an element of that. And I've been on the far side of definitely a lot of shame and blaming myself, self-hatred, and have found a place inside of myself that I can fully love and accept and just be with, and then still those patterns come. So how does one start the road towards transmuting shame into love and compassion?
Yeah. So for me, it comes down to this idea of nervous system literacy. So I have a story that I can.
What's that?
Yeah. So it's understanding the way that your system works, right? So here's an example. It's kind of a funny story because it should be an embarrassing story, except that it's not at this point for me. So one of the ways we've talked about that your body can discharge stress through shaking, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So one of the other ways that your body can do it is, there's a couple of ways, crying, shaking, inappropriate laughter. So that, those times where you've laughed and you're like, it's not funny and I don't mean to be laughed, but I don't know how to control it. And it just is sort of happening.
Yeah.
That's actually a discharge mechanism.
Okay.
But then another one is sweating. And this is the one that my body loves to do. So when I get nervous, I sweat. And so I had this appointment, this was a couple of years ago, I have really bad TMJ. So my jaw
TMJ?
joint, it's the temporomandibular jaw disorder, right? So
Okay.
this thing I'm pointing, I know people can't see what I'm pointing at.
It's okay.
What's this called? My jaw joint is messed up. And so I have a lot of pain and it causes headaches, and it's something I have been dealing with for years and years. And I had, again, this is such a common story for me, but I had tried all the things, right? And I had, excuse me. Anyway, I needed to go see the specialist, and I had to wait to get in to see him. I was desperate. Nothing else was helping. And he was kind of the last straw. So I go into the appointment, and I've really been looking forward to it because I'm in pain and I need him to help me. And I get there, and he has a very flat tone of voice. He has no facial expression. He has no personality. I mean, the guy was like a wet cardboard box. I mean, nothing. And I was super nervous because I really needed his help. And then the way that your nervous system is designed is that it is constantly searching and scanning your environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. And what it'll do in the absence of safety is it'll interpret it as danger, right? And it does that in service of survival because it wants to get you out of there. If it's not a safe environment, it wants to move you, which is what we want it to do. And so a couple of ways that we can interpret cues of safety are through facial expressions and also prosody of voice. So the way that your voice changes, the way that it reacts, the way it softens and loudens and responds. And so I was getting none of those from him. I was getting nothing. And I have a history of trauma. And so my brain is especially attuned to those things. And when I don't have those keys of safety, my body, and this is all subconscious, this is my survival brain working, is instead says danger, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it flooded my body with a surge of survival hormones. Now, I could burn those off through fighting or flighting, but I'm sitting in the dentist's office. I'm not going to fight the dentist, and I'm not going to leave the dentist because I need his help, right? So I'm sitting here, and instead, what do? I start sweating buckets. I mean, it's like I'm disgustingly sweaty,
Wow.
right? Like super sexy, just sweat everywhere. And I had to, I had to leave, and I had to like make the next appointment, and I'm like in the park, and I just feel so, it's so embarrassing. It's like, I'm very clearly just drenched. I feel horrible. I look gross. I feel awful. And I'm like driving home, and I'm like, damn it, why does this always happen to me? Like, what's wrong with me? Right. I start this cycle of internal dialogue. Why does this happen to me? What's wrong with me? Why do I always do that? I hate it. I can't stand it. And then I'm driving, and it hits me, and I realize, oh, that's what happened. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel, he had no person, he wasn't reacting to my jokes, he wasn't nodding his head, he wasn't speaking with he didn't have any kindness, I couldn't, no compassion, no bedside manner at all. And so my survival brain said danger, right? And I had all of these thoughts that I explained to you just now. And I went, oh my God, no wonder I'm so sweaty. Like, that makes perfect sense. Right. So it didn't change the fact that I was sweaty in the moment. I still had to go home and change. But what it did is it changed that in the moment. It interrupted that cycle then. And then what it did is the next time when I had to go back and have that next appointment, I didn't sweat at all.
Wow.
Because I went in and I knew, I was like, okay, I was able to have this sort of like conscious dialogue now. He doesn't seem safe. Like, it's like sort of like a conversation between my thinking brain and my survival brain. Like, okay, my thinking brain goes, all right, I know, I get it. He's weird, no personality. I wish he would respond to my jokes, my attempts to break the ice, but he's not doing it. So instead, I'm going to give myself cues of safety on purpose. I'm going to do this breathing exercise. I'm going to do this orienting exercise. I'm going to calm my system internally because it's not being calmed through these external inputs, right? And I didn't sweat at all. I was able to interrupt that. So then I was able to leave the appointment. I didn't have to have that shame spiral. I didn't have to get into that cycle of feeling bad and embarrassed and ashamed, right? I was able to interrupt it. And that's what nervous system literacy does. It allows us to transform that because we start to understand exactly the way that we're working and how that's on purpose. And there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with being sweaty. There's nothing wrong with crying. There's nothing wrong with shaking or laughing, right? If you're at a funeral and you're laughing and you feel horrible, like I did when I was 9 years old, and I didn't understand what was going on then, I just felt bad. Now, if that were to happen to me, I would understand and have this literacy that there's nothing wrong. My body's just trying to protect me. It's just trying to discharge this stuff. And so maybe if it's not appropriate to be laughing right now, I can leave and do it someplace where it's, where I'm alone, or I can do this other thing to provide cues of safety and I can do something about it. I have power and agency over this rather than letting these things happen to me. I can participate in the story. I can write the story instead of having it be written for me. And that power is incredible.
Wow. I'm just taking it all in.
Yeah, I can talk.
Yeah. You can, but it's really powerful as well. So yeah. How did this help with your with giving birth? Did this help?
Well, it didn't. That's actually I'll be honest. This is one of those things.
Experience.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that up because I actually had a really horrible birth experience. And I was so removed from my normal. Birth is such a weird portal, right? Like being in labor and going through that experience. It was such it's been 2 years and I'm still like trying to come to terms with even what happened and how to even explain it. But essentially, I was so disconnected from who I feel like normally that I had no capacity for understanding at that moment.
Okay. Yeah. I think that kind of makes sense. Because what you're talking about is like normal life situations, but obviously, I've never sort of witnessed anyone giving birth or anything, but just an assumption I would make, it's like a massive experience, probably like the biggest experience you'll ever go through. So it makes sense that you probably can't still putting together what actually happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, and excuse me, I mean, I have been able to look back because it was a traumatic experience, right? I have been able to look back and sort of change and start to process that trauma. So for me, it didn't prevent the trauma from happening, but it has allowed me to process it in a way that I don't think I would have had access to were I not doing this work and were I not, teaching this to others. So does
Okay.
that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it does. So TRE is good for like people like that have given birth. Like it's good to release yourself from that. Is that what we're saying? Or
yeah, I mean, the TRE is a component of everything that I do.
yep.
It's funny because TRE actually did help me in birth because for anyone listening that has given birth, a common experience is to shake it can almost be violently right after delivering. And I knew exactly what was happening, right? So obviously giving birth and labor is a huge stressor on your system. And so you have a discharge and obviously it's a huge hormonal event, right? And so your body shakes as a discharge. And I knew that, but it's funny, I've asked some other groups, like, what happened to you after, just sort of out of curiosity, like, what happened? Did anyone else shake, and how was it explained to you? And most people were told, oh, it's because you're cold. Oh, it's because you're tired. Oh, it's because your muscles are fatigued from the work of giving birth. It's labor. They call it that for a reason. Right. And it's just interesting that that's sort of what our understanding is. That's what the labor and delivery nurses will tell you that it is. And it's not because you're tired. It's not because there can be a component of, your muscles being fatigued, but really what it is a nervous system discharge. So anyone that has given birth and you were shaking afterwards, that's exactly what was happening. In TRE, we take it a lot slower. We don't go into it the way that you do right after the baby is born, but that is another way that your body discharges is after birth.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. It's still blowing my mind because I've just never really been in this field before, like talking to a mother and talking about birth. But it's yeah, I can feel that it really benefit a lot of mothers out there that have experienced these things that could probably really relate to what they've been through and what you've been through.
Well, and what was so fascinating for me is that I did a lot of birth preparation and I read a lot of books and, podcast and my midwife, and I didn't come across that at all. No one told me that was going to happen. And so if I didn't know what that was, it would have scared the hell out of me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of a sudden your body is shaking and you're just tremoring on the table. And had I not known what that was, it would have been completely overwhelming and just felt scary, right? And so I think that when we can talk about this and normalize it and again have an understanding of what that is, it benefits everyone.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Did your let's get on to intuition. What's your take on intuition and sort of where it comes from or how it's utilized? How do you use intuition in your life?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a pretty deep one, I know, but it's always a good topic, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was actually watching an Instagram story the other day about I don't know exactly what she is. She's some kind of birth worker. And she was saying that in a training that she had just taken, that they told her that intuition wasn't real. They spent a whole day trying to tell them that intuition wasn't real. And her reaction, of course, was that's BS. And so I'm watching the video going, yes, that's BS. Because I believe that it's absolutely real. And I think that we have this sort of internal guidance system
Mm.
that is so much smarter and more capable than we are. And when I say than we are, it's like, well, then who's that person that I'm talking about? And that's the kind of conscious brain to me,
Mm.
that this intuition is seated deeper in that there's this older part of ourselves. Our thinking brain is relatively new in terms of our like evolution. And I think that this intuition is so much deeper than that. And I think it's also, to me, it's like the voice of God, really. It's that channel to the divine that's in us. And that when we can listen to that, people, talk about talking with God and hearing God. And in my mind, I think they're listening to their intuition. I mean, some people are probably hearing voices and are having an issue other than that. But really, to me, that's kind of what it is. When I can connect to that place inside of myself, it's not even really me. It's just universal truth. And
Yeah.
I'm just being a conduit of that and allowing that to channel through me. And when I can connect to that, that's when I can't hold a flame to that. That power is so much greater than anything I could ever think of. So I listen to that and follow that. When I get those pings of intuition, I know enough to heed the word and listen and go where it's telling me to go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I had a feeling that you were going to really explain that so well. Like I'm with you on everything you just said. That's such a deeper understanding, and that's definitely like it's kind of like the intuitive heart. Like the heart just knows. Like there's just like an inner knowing. I've many times in my life I've kind of moved in different places, and it's kind of from the thinking mind, it may look like I've done something totally against what would be normal, or why would I say no to, a high paying job and sell everything and just go start doing yoga in a community. I would do that because the intuitive heart just says that's where you're meant to be. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no, and once you give power to that and surrender to that more and more, life becomes a bit more like a flow. It becomes a bit more easier to take the bigger sort of pitfalls of life, and it's for me anyway, it's easier to sort of open up to the unknown more, because it's unknown, but there's trust there. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're trusting. It's unknown, but you're not scared of it. Like I'm not scared of it as much. There's fear that comes, but who's it come to? It comes to the thinking mind. It comes to the ego. It comes to the person that could only the person could be afraid of the future that is unknown to them, because that person or identity is probably not going to be experiencing that future, because we're going into a place of being uncomfortable, or not in a place where that person can be. I hope people are meeting me on this level. um and yeah, I think that's, I don't know where I was going with that. I just I just, the trust that comes and the surrender that comes to that, and the ease that comes with living your life that way. And I suppose the opposite side of that is I didn't have a choice but to do that, because I had a point in my life where the suffering was just too great. Like the suffering was too great, and I was resisting too much. Like I was resisting everything. I was resisting my body. I was resisting the intuitive heart, is not listening. Not all these things is constantly overriding it. And I think that for me is like the pinnacle of suffering, is like
Mm-hmm.
resisting the intuitive wisdom, the intuitive heart, the inner knowing that knows where you're meant to be, and what it's meant to, like how it's meant to relate with the world and itself. And sort of not giving power to that is eventually going to bring the system into a state of like dis-ease or suffering or resistance. And I think that's why I'm inspired to talk to people like you, to teach yoga, to teach meditation, to get people to hopefully get behind that thinking mind and into that intuitive heart, so we can all move into that expansion. And that brings me back into like how exciting this time is, because in this time of lockdowns, in this times of crazy politics, in this times of whatever the hell's going on, the thinking mind is just like, it can't comprehend anything. Like I can't, if I get too far left, too far right, I can't, there's too much information. Like I can't comprehend what the hell's going on. So the only
Mm-hmm.
thing I can do is just bring all of that back in and go like, what's happening now? Like what's happening in my reality right now? And it's like, it's beautiful. Like it's amazing. It's just
Right.
like everything's great. And it's just like, oh, I can just rest in that then. Like there's nothing else to do.
That's so beautiful. I agree with all of that so much. And it's interesting watching just sort of what's happening in the world this year. And it's just, there's so much fear,
Mm,
right? And I'm not saying that fear isn't in some ways justified, but there's also an element of, when people are in this place of fear, they tend to stay there, and it can be hard to move them out of that. And our it's hard to tap into our intuition when we're scared. And it's hard to listen to that voice and to trust it when we're scared. And I think that I have been seeing a lot of that in my own life. I've been seeing a lot of that in my own community and in the United States for sure. And I think that just being aware of that can help shift that. Again, I'm not saying there's not things to be afraid of with what's going on in the world, but I also don't know that, I think staying in that place is going to do a lot of harm. And I really wish and hope for all of our sakes that we can move away from that, even just for a moment, to be able to connect to that intuition, you know?
Mm.
And I understand why that's hard for people, but I also understand how important it is that we aren't just living in constant resistance, and that we can find that place of surrendering to something that is greater than ourselves, and trusting, like you said, that, darkness is not always scary, and darkness is actually sometimes the greatest fertilizer for the most incredible things in our life to be able to grow out of. But we need that balance in our life, and without it, life is it's suffering, and it's disease, and it's hard, and I've done that, and it's not fun.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think it's all about balance. Like the universe is constantly balancing itself. So this year has been a lot of fear. It still seems to be evolving the situation. But what I feel in my reality is this like tremendous surge of love, like this tremendous surge of like conscious uprising, like, and it's not happening so much like in our screens and stuff, but what's happening in my reality, and things are getting deeper. The understanding is getting deeper. People are turning more towards leading a healthier, more fulfilling life. Like that's why it's exciting. Like that's like the fear is there, but everything's being shown. So like now we have the choice. Are we going to keep perpetuating that fear and keep listening to the mainstream media and keep going along with this story, this bullshit that we're being sold? Are we going to keep
Okay, good. We're
accepting
on
this?
the same track that it's all bullshit.
Yeah. Are we going to keep? It's a tough one, that one, isn't it? It's probably as far as we should go, but yeah.
Well,
Um,
yeah, because it's hard to sort of. Here's my thing: is that I am an innately curious person, and I am a questioner, and that has got me into a lot of trouble in my life. But it also, I think, is a huge asset. But given the situation that we're in now, I have had to be extra cautious about where and who I question in front of, because we are living in so much fear that you're instantly labeled as someone who, whatever. It's just,
hmm.
yeah. To say that it's bullshit gets you.
Yeah, I understand. And
It's just,
but
it's not. But yes, I'm right there with you. And I
yeah,
interrupted you. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. That's I think that just highlights the need for all of us to come back into that intuitive heart space, into that love. If we're all in that fear, then of course your belief challenges that, like perpetuates that fear more. Like if what you're saying is going against that, the world is a certain way, and if there's not enough understanding within, then that's going to triggers a response, an emotional response. I've copped a little bit of feedback here and there of these like emotional hitbacks, just from posting a few things on Facebook. And it's kind of triggered my emotional as well, because then I'm like, I feel like I'm back at school and I'm being bullied or something like that. And I'm like, whoa, like, and it's just like, wow, this like social media is like can become a porthole of like just really negative emotional reactions, which normally
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't do that to each other if we were down like just down the street or having a coffee, or we just like we're at work or something. Like we wouldn't go to that extent, but it seems to be because there's a screen in between, we can kind of like barrage it. But actually, from what I'm experiencing is that it still impacts a very similar way. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and it still does trigger a response within me, and I've been triggering a response in someone else, and so it's been a process to okay, I think it's all bullshit and not take what we're being sold. Essentially, like it's just like we've got people that are selling us things. We're being sold these things, and I'm like, I'm not buying. Like I'm not buying. Like I'm not buying this shit. So, but I'm realizing I don't need to be on this pedestal and tell other people not to buy either. Like it's everyone's choice to buy. Like it's kind of, but what I can do in my reality and what you're doing in your reality is we can just teach yoga and meditation, or we can just bring more love or try to transmute. I see it, we're all like alchemists, like we're just changing fear, we're transmuting fear into love, fear into love. Everyone's doing it, not just yoga teachers. People are doing it on the work site. People are doing it everywhere. Like that's the reality I see. Like I just see people just transmuting fear into love, and it's so beautiful. Like it feels like that's what we're all meant to be doing. So it's just kind of like, it's exciting.
Oh, I love it. And then, I mean, I think it's the most important work in the world, because I don't think the opposite of love is hate. I really think the opposite of love is fear.
Mm.
And I think that that's, just it's just so, like, the microcosm and it's all so related, right? It's like what you do, just to tie this back to the beginning of the conversation. It's like the work that I'm doing in my family line changes the world, because it isn't just my family line.
Mm.
It affects it affects things backwards and forwards. It affects me. It makes it so that I can then show up in the world as a better person. And when I'm a better person, I'm less triggering to you. And then when you're less triggering, then you can, when I can find common humanity between us and allow you that opportunity to find common humanity with me, then it spills, when we start to take care of ourselves, it spills over our water's edge.
Mm.
Self-care isn't just about us. It becomes community care. It becomes care for humanity. It really does change the world and make things better, so that we can be these alchemists transforming fear into love.
Yeah, beautiful. That's so good. I think yeah, it's so great. I've really enjoyed this podcast. Do you have any upcoming offerings or things that you're offering online that you would like to share, or that we can
Well,
find you?
yeah, so you can find me on my website, which is christagowen.com. And then I also facilitate a Facebook group, which I call my virtual village of radical mothers. And you can find that. I have links to it on my website, but it's, if you search in Facebook for the Radical Mother Project, you can join us there. We have conversations like this to empower and inspire and support one another on this journey. And then if you're interested in doing TRE, one of the things, about this entire pandemic situation is there's been some silver linings. Like now I'm working with clients online, and so I can work with folks all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I do appointments and sessions virtually. So you can find information about how to work with me if you're interested in TRE specifically on my site.
Oh, that's perfect. That all sounds really good. I love the name, the Radical Mothers. Like it just says so much, because I think the change is coming in this grassroots level, and it's coming through the mothers actually. Like
Yeah.
that's where the power lies. Like that motherly like instinct. It's like not gonna take this type of thing. Like it's,
Right.
yeah, and it empowers like me, the masculine. Like it empowers us to want to just support that, and then find our role in just supporting that like courageous motherly instinct.
Yes.
So yeah, I love all
Well, and
this.
it
Yeah.
brings back in, I mean, we're so sorely lacking in like strong feminine energy and
Yep.
that balance of, what we're missing. And so that I see, when I truly believe that when mothers heal, the world heals, right? And so
Mm.
when we can support that, it is better for everyone.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, so good. Yeah, I'm really inspired. I don't know
Well,
what for,
great.
not to have birth, but I'm inspired to get the message out there to transmute
Yes.
fear into love. Let's go on. Let's leave on that note. That's perfect.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Christa.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
No worries. Thank you so much. You have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
All right. See ya.
Bye.